In this video, I will go over a handful of subjects covering, broadly speaking, all you really need to become a solid tank. Whether you are a player picking up tanking for the first time, or have some experience with it, I imagine there will be something you didn't know. And if you are getting into tanking for the first time, I have guides for every tank in the game that go level by level, so you can start learning from them regardless of what level you are at. Links to all of those guides in the description. Now, if you have a tip to help your fellow tanks to improve, I would also love to hear about that in the comments. But with that said, turn on your tank stances and let's get started. Number 1. Pulling. The first thing a tank will have to do in a duty of any kind, typically, will be pulling. Sure, indeed, sometimes someone else will do it, but even then, you will then have to do the rounding up of mobs or engaging the boss. Let's approach AoE pulls and boss pulls separately, starting with AoE pulls. Starting with, before you even enter combat, consider that sprint's duration is 20 seconds if you use it while not in combat, and only 10 seconds if you use it once you are in combat. The 20 seconds carry over into combat, meaning if you sprint just before you enter combat, you get to round up mobs with sprint for a full 20 seconds. In a situation where sprint helps, and it usually does, if you can, sprinting before you enter combat is always better than waiting until you are in combat. If you know the duty well, you can even use sprint even earlier so that your certain sprint will be off cooldown again in time before your next pull starts. But that one is a little optimizy. The important bit is sprinting before the fight starts, to the best of your ability. The next step is actually pulling the mobs. For this, I like to use two different strategies. The obvious one is simply run up to the enemies and press your AoE button and then run onward for the next pack, or stay where you are if you have reached your destination. If, however, you're pulling a pack that is not your destination and is at most 4 mobs or so, then there is an alternative pulling strategy I like to use. Pull the first mob with your ranged attack, like Lightning Shot or Tomahawk. Pull the second mob with Provoke, which is OGCD. Then pull the third mob with your ranged attack again, and should there be a fourth mob, target it and ranged attack that one once the GCD is ready, as you run past the pack. What makes this alternative pulling strategy so effective is that it works consistently regardless of how the pack is positioned, as certain duties may have the pack weirdly widely spread out. Some players also have trouble with timing their AoE attack just right so they hit all the mobs, where this strategy does not suffer from this weakness. A notable detail is that the AoE filler combos of tanks have a built-in 2x enmity multiplier, whereas the ranged attacks have, I believe it is a 5x multiplier, but it might actually be 7. It might vary between the attacks too. Provoke also appears to generate over 4,000 potencies worth of enmity in addition to putting you at the top, and stacking with your tank stance, making it even stronger than your ranged attacks, or even your strongest attacks. Note that this ranged attack pulling strategy may be a lot harder to pull off on a controller, or so I've been told. Now, I did sort of imply with these pulling strategies that you will be pulling more than one pack at a time. While you are new to tanking, it is perfectly understandable to prefer to pull only one pack at a time to feel safe, and certain duties, especially a Realm Reborn ones, don't really give you a solid idea of how much you can or should pull, which doesn't help either. My advice on this is that however much you do pull, I highly recommend that you at least work your way up to feeling confident pulling 2 packs at a time. For a lot of dungeons, it is also perfectly safe to pull more than that, leading to the so-called wall-to-wall pull. Pull everything until a wall bars your way. The key is that the more packs you pull, the more crucial it is that you're on top of how to tank well. So here is a demonstration of how a pull could look, starting with an early sprint into pulling the first pack and moving it along. A bonus tip is that if you really want to be sure a pack sticks to you after you did an AoE attack, stick around for a second AoE attack. However, do not stop moving. Zigzag forward to slow yourself down a bit, but do not stop moving, as that might give the wrong idea to your party that you're actually not going to move any further. Pulling bosses is much simpler. Simply use your range attack as your approach, or start your rotation once you are in range, and then get in position. If you are the only tank, or the designated main tank, you can also use Provoke after the range attack or as you run up to the boss to be sure you stay in the lead. While you can also pull with a gap closer like Onslaught, outside of rushing through a dungeon or some such, simply running up to the boss with Sprint and then starting your rotation normally is both more effective for your own rotation, but also makes it easier for your team to keep up and follow through on it. Number 2. Positioning. Now that you've engaged in battle, the next thing to worry about is where to put yourself. Many new tanks may feel compelled to jump around wildly, and while that does have its moments, that is generally not how you tank the best. After pulling a bunch of enemies, try to position yourself such that the mobs bunch up in one spot, for instance, in front of you. While tanks have a lot of attacks that strike in a circle around themselves, some of their attacks, as well as attacks of other party members, may instead shoot in a line or center on the enemy, which means having the mobs in a large circle around you makes it very difficult to hit all of them equally. If not for you, then for someone else. Particularly large mobs or packs with large mobs may be harder to do this with and may shuffle away and circle you anyway. You can work against this by carefully stepping backwards to force the enemies to bunch up to come to you, or alternatively use what I call the sheepdog method, which means that you either circle the pack of mobs or alternate positioning yourself at spots where only one of the mobs can reach you, forcing all the other mobs to run into it. The important part is trying to keep the mobs as bunched up as you can. A bonus thing to keep in mind is that some jobs have ground targeted AoEs. Dark Knight's Salted Earth, Summoner's Slipstream, Ninja's Doton, and if you can, keeping the mobs inside those circles will also help. Healers also have large domes they can put down that help and protect, but unless these are placed really weirdly, or you actively try to escape them, you shouldn't need to worry about those. Positioning for bosses is quite different though. Because of the existence of positional damage bonuses for all melee DPS jobs, if you can, keeping the boss still and not turning as much as possible is the best you can do. Generally, this means as you pull a boss, you try to position it sort of in the center of the arena if it is relevant to do so, or then you run past the boss to face it away from the party. In most cases, this will face the boss north, or what some would call relative north. Don't think too hard on it. At this point, you simply stay put until you have to move for something, or until the boss moves for something. Being predictable in your movements is what's important here. Most of the time, once a boss starts casting something, they will not turn to face you until a bit after their spell finishes, allowing you to step away and then step back in front of them before they start turning. If a boss starts turning all sorts of weird directions all on their own terms, what is often most effective is to simply place yourself in front of the boss, wherever it is facing, to prevent it from spinning afterwards. This is typically good enough if the fight doesn't call for the boss to be facing some specific direction, and is very effective in a fight where the boss keeps jumping around and turning, as you give the melees a short reprieve where at least you don't spin it. In rare cases, aggressively turning the boss in anticipation of a specific mechanic may also be beneficial. For example, for M4N, Wicked Thunder, early in the fight, she will perform 2 half-room cleaves, cleaving the north and south in either order. By turning the boss 90 degrees before that, the tank can save the melees from sudden jerks later, as everyone will be able to carefully dodge both cleaves. Another example of moving the boss around aggressively is also M4N. During her first wing phase, she puts down several delayed line AoEs, but she will fight you from the edge of the arena if you don't move her. Forcibly dragging her to the middle makes it easier for melees to reach positionals, and also makes it easier for everyone, you included, to dodge the AoEs by having more paths of escape if you need them. Number 3. Selflessness. Considering the 2 previous tips seem to have a lot more to do with what the rest of your team needs rather than what you need, I feel like it makes sense to explain why you should care about these things. All of the advice so far greatly emphasizes maximizing your damage output while simultaneously maximizing your team's damage output. The more damage they do, the faster you win. It's that simple. However, for example in the case of pulling more than one pack at a time, unless you are heavily undergeared or severely inexperienced, pulling one pack means you don't need any of your defensive cooldowns really most of the time, meaning they just go to waste. Simultaneously, by pulling more at a time, the various cooldowns the party has will be used more effectively. While it varies from duty to duty and party to party, the majority of dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV are structured as 2 packs, wall, 2 packs, wall, boss, repeated 3 times. In most of these cases, each set of mobs take approximately a minute to deal with, adding up to approximately 2 minutes from the start till you meet the first boss. This is, of course, assuming your team all gives it everything they've got. So the important part is that by playing in a consistent, predictable, and reliable way, your party can play better too. Number 4. Defensives. Speaking of defensive cooldowns, how do we deal with that? For AoE pulls, the concept known as defensive cooldown cycling is important to understand. While you may have several defensive cooldowns to protect you, and using all of them means you take minimal damage, you and your healer can only heal so much in a given time frame, and using all of your cooldowns at once means you first take no damage, meaning all that healing goes to waste, and then you take a lot of damage, requiring the healer to overspend to just keep you standing. By instead metering out your cooldowns, you can reduce the damage you take enough that the healing you and your healer can provide is sufficient. This is what defensive cooldown cycling is. While you're actively fighting a big AoE pull, maintain one solid defensive cooldown at a time throughout the fight, cycling through them. In certain duties where the pulls are even harder, in particular some of the early dungeons in both Shadowbringers and Endwalker, 2 at a time early in a fight may also be necessary. Exactly how you order your defensive cooldowns come down to preference, but leading with your short cooldown once you have access to it is a solid plan, as it usually means it comes up twice in one pull. An example of a cycling order could be done with Gunbreaker. Open with your short cooldown, Heart of Corundum. Then, once it ends, use your big defensive cooldown, Nebula. Then, once that ends, you could use Heart of Corundum again after a moment, or you could use Reprisal. Then, for the next pull, you do the same thing, but replace Nebula with Rampart. You could also swap them based on the difficulty of the pulls. This also leaves a few cooldowns on the table in case you need more, and an often forgotten one is Arm's Length, which, in addition to blocking knockbacks, also makes enemies that hit you swing slower, equating to about 17% damage reduction, rounded up. The reason we lead with bigger cooldowns and then scale down is because by the time something like Reprisal might be used, the pull is hopefully over soon. In cases where you might need to lead with 2 cooldowns at once, combining something like Heart of Corundum with your other cooldown makes sense. In regards to invulnerabilities like Super Bolide, letting your healer know that you are going to use it before pull starts, if you plan to use it beforehand, is a good idea as it allows your healer to plan better around it. Again, being predictable. For boss fights, defensive cooldowns are a bit different once again. Saving a big one for a mechanic you know is coming, notably tank busters, is a healthy choice, but if or once you know some of your cooldowns simply are not needed anywhere, keeping a cooldown running while the boss is swinging at you is not a bad idea, and is also something that will be immensely helpful should you decide to tank extremes or indeed savage content, where even the boss auto attacks hurt a ton. The important part is knowing that the cooldown is in excess before you do this. On top of this, cooldowns like Reprisal and other ones that protect your team are of course well used when the boss does something that hits the team, but if it is what you need to survive, don't just let them sit there. Number 5. Tanking with other tanks present. In duties where there are multiple tanks, whether it is a raid or an alliance raid, the way things work is a little different. A lot of the time, you really just need one tank at a time, so determining who is tanking the boss is the first priority. Ultimately, who becomes the tank is whoever takes over enmity and maintains it, but a more considerate way to approach it is as follows. If your co-tank already has their tank stance on, or even better, just turned it on, wait with turning yours on, and let them go for it. About 30 seconds into the fight, around when your opener has ended, turn on your tank stance to be sure you are second on the list. In casual fights where bosses don't choose tank targets based on enmity alone, you may also be able to get away with simply provoking and then standing up if you need to take over tanking. In most casual duties, the job of the off-tank is to simply support the main tank and be ready to take over if something goes wrong. This support can include using any shareable defensive cooldowns on them, such as Intervention, Nascent Flash, Heart of Corundum, or the Blackest Night, also known as TBN. Off-tanks also tend to be the ones engaging adds, if any, which happens more frequently in alliance raids. But that is pretty much it. If you're not the main tank, try to make sure you're second in enmity, which you can do by turning off your stance again if you get too close, or by using Shirk to pass enmity to the main tank. In an alliance raid, you could also do this by using Shirk on someone in your alliance, simply to stay under the tank in the other alliance. After that, simply support the main tank as best you can. Number 6. Limit Break. This one is a more general tip, but in case you don't know about it, the limit break is, in PvE content, a shared resource that if one player uses it, everyone loses it, so it matters who uses it. In PvP, the limit break gauge is your own. Now, the tank limit break is one of the most situational, as what it does is reduce damage taken by your whole party by 20% for 10 seconds, 40% for 15 seconds, or 80% for 8 seconds, depending on which level of limit break. Outside of rather specific desperate circumstances, the tank limit break is usually only used as limit break 3, and most of the time, you'll know that you need to use it. Which is to say, in most content, the tank simply won't need to use their limit break, as the other limit breaks are a bit more helpful. There are, however, specific boss mechanics that effectively are raid-wide attacks that kill everyone unless tank limit break 3 is active, in which case the attack does more reasonable damage. Number 7. Tips and tricks to push on when things go sideways. These tricks are generally only recommended if it is the last resort. The first one is kiting. The reason why tanks can so safely pull several packs of mobs with no defensive cooldown running until you actually reach the destination is the simple fact that the mobs don't hit that much when they're out of range. This is also why sprinting while you are pulling is so important, as it gives the enemies even less of a chance to swing at you while you're pulling. However, if something happens and you need to play for time, just for a couple of seconds, either for a cooldown of your own or to give your healer a chance to heal you, stepping away or outright running away is a strategy. Just keep in mind that this comes at a huge cost to the damage output of your party. The second tip, which is even more niche, is that many enemies, especially in older content, need to properly face you to hit you. Meaning if you run around the mobs, they'll spend less time attacking you and more time spinning. If everyone is AoEing anyway, this doesn't really hurt anyone, but if you start doing this on bosses, it can often lead to your party getting randomly hit by a cleaving attack of some sort, or your melees getting annoyed they can't get their positionals. The third and last one is a bit simpler. All 4 tanks have ways to heal themselves more with slightly unusual rotations. Warriors can forego using Fell Cleave and just spam the Storm's Path combo to survive. Dark Knights can do the same with their Soul Eater combo. Gunbreakers can go all the way down to just using the first 2 steps of their combo to heal with Brutal Shell. Paladins can do the exact same to generate MP faster so they can use Clemency, a spell that itself should really only be used in more desperate situations most of the time. The important part is to try and think out of the box and don't just give up. Tanks have some of the most flexible toolkits of all the roles after all. Now, I hope you found some of this advice helpful, and if you have any tips for tanks of your own, please be sure to leave them in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, the tank AoE combo starters bottom out at 100 potency per target. Combined with tank stance and the enmity multiplier, and the fact tanks do 20% less damage than other roles, this adds up to 1600 potency worth of enmity. Before this enmity bonus, this would have been just 800, which does make it quite fascinating that the job that almost certainly caused this change, Pictomancer, often led with Pommuse during a pull, which, with Maim and Mend, was 1430 potency, on at least the main target, and at least at the time. Just shy of the new 1600 AoE filler enmity potency for tanks. How perfect, right?